Hi everyone, we're back with our discussion for Chapter 8. And so here at the top of page 117, we find that Bobby Poole has finally been transferred to a new prison. But he's still on Ron's mind about what's going on. And because Ron decided, okay, no, I can't let this anger control me, he's got to control Ed. And he ends up joining the choir, which helps because he really does enjoy singing. And then his conviction is overturned. They say, yes, the fact that Mary Reynolds could not identify him in a lineup should have been told to the jury. So Ron finally has hope for the first time in prison. And hope can be a very fickle thing for a prisoner because it can be taken away like that. Okay? The problem is with the criminal justice system is once they have convicted you and they have you, they fight tooth and nail to prevent you from ever getting out. His second trial comes up in November 1987. He is visited by his family, except for his mom, since she's still recovering, but she wants to be there for the trial. And then right before the trial begins, what happens? Suddenly, Mary recognizes him from the lineup. And he's like, why? Why is this happening to me? I don't understand. So there's a new DA for the case, and he is actually black. He has one of the lawyers from last time plus someone else. They decide this time he's going to be charged with Jennifer's rape and then Mary's rape, and they're going to combine both of those cases into one trial, so there's not two trials. His lawyers are definitely interested in talking with Bobby, and they interview Kenny. And then unfortunately, still, Mary and Jennifer are allowed to be in the courtroom to hear each other's stories. And that is very problematic because they can try to align their stories even if it's not true. But then we have this big issue, jury selection. So you're entitled to a jury of your peers. If you are black and you have an all-white jury, that's not a jury of your peers. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happens in his second trial. There is a case out of Mississippi called the Curtis Flowers case. And this is a man who was charged with murdering 4 people back in the 90s. And he has had 6 trials. It's the most anybody has ever gone through the trial. And the DA, Doug Evans, just keeps trying him over and over and over and again. And what keeps giving him a new trial is the fact that Doug Evans, every time it happens, he picks an all-white jury. And so that they appeal that, and on appeal they say, nope, that's not right, so we give him a new trial. And then he does something else, and he gets a new one and a new one. In fact, in the last trial, they did actually have a black juror on there, and the black juror said, no, I can't find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge in that case threatened to arrest him for it. And that's not right on its own. And this is Mississippi. This is down in the deep south where, quite frankly, they're still acting like it's 1940s. And so there was a podcast done a couple years ago called In the Dark. They covered Curtis's case on season 2. It's like 6 episodes or something like that. I think I might try and do it for one of my 101 papers because it's really interesting. But because of what was found in that podcast, Curtis was able to take his case all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, when they looked at this case, they looked at 2 jurors in this his 6th trial. They looked at 2 jurors and why one had been dismissed and the other one was kept. Both were women. One was white, one was black. Both of them had family connections to Curtis's family. So that right there should have meant neither one of them should have been on the jury. But they kept the white one and not the black one. And the only difference was skin color. And so they said, yeah, this was racism. This was prejudice. So yeah, you get a new trial. So luckily for Curtis, then he gets to go have the 7th trial. And so they had a bail hearing. And so he was granted bail. And because of the popularity of his case, folks were able to raise money for him, so he finally was released on bail. And the next morning, he flew out of state to an undisclosed location because he was getting death threats. Now, the DA in this case, he just won a re-election, but he wasn't there for the bail hearing, and the people of the community were pissed at him. They don't believe that Curtis is innocent, but they were pissed that this same prosecutor was not there that day. And so eventually, Doug Evans has stepped aside from this case, and so the Attorney General's office is going to have to appoint someone, and they claim that they're going to try him again for the seventh time. But during this podcast, another suspect has come forward that looks more promising as the actual person. There feels like there's more evidence for that. And then there's witnesses who testified who are recanting their statements. So very interesting to see how that plays out. But yes, if you are a black defendant, you should not have a white jury. So finally, we find out for the trial, Bobby will be there, Kenny will be there. Kenny is very nervous, but Ron respects him for coming forward. His mom testifies again, but because of her stroke, it doesn't go very well. Jennifer's still mad at him. She still hates him with a passion, and she testifies. Mary testifies, but it's a lot harder for her to do. We do learn about what happens with her. I think in that case, the rapist learns from his time with Jennifer that I cannot have my face seen, so he really shines a light into Mary's face. And Ron comes to the conclusion that, look, we're all, Mary, Jennifer, and Ron are all victims in this case. We find out that Mary is showing a difference in height in her testimony, and she claims that she was too scared to identify him in the lineup. Remember, that lineup was everybody was in the same room, and that is not okay. And then on page 129, we have voir dire. So before this evidence can be presented to the jury, the judge has to decide if he is going to allow it. So that's where they talk to Bobby and they talk to Kenny. And we find out that there was blood evidence at Mary's scene, and Ron's blood type is O positive. The blood type found at Mary's was A. Guess what? So was Bobby's. Bobby's is A too. Bobby, he denies everything. But he's got a very similar MO. So the other crimes, the other rapes that he has done are very similar to what happened in Ron's case. But the judge just keeps throwing it all out. He rules against it all. So the jury never hears about this other possible suspect. And here's the thing. Bobby Poole was in the courtroom with Jennifer and Mary, and neither lady recognized him at all. We hear again from one of the other suspects, his manager at the restaurant, but then he's changed his story a little bit too. He says, well, we did have a problem with Ron with the waitresses. He was messing with them, touching them on their shoulders and their bodies and their rears and telling dirty jokes. And so what they're trying to do here is show a pattern for Ron, to show that Ron's the better suspect for this when really it was Bobby. And so they even go as far to say that one of the ladies was 18 and the other was 47, and they were white. Ron talks about the first time he got in trouble. Remember the donut money? And even then, at the age of 9, he was considered to be a bad boy. And so that's hard to grow up like that. Always seeming like everybody just looks down on you all the time. And unfortunately for a lot of people of color, especially for black boys growing up, that happens. And that's one of the reasons why we have problems in our educational school system, where a lot, especially black girls, get in trouble and expelled a lot because it's assumed that you're supposed to act a certain way, and if you don't, then there's something wrong. And then during the trial, Ron has a cellmate, and he says, hey, my buddy Dennis actually talked to Bobby, and Bobby confessed to him. So instead of Ron going and talking to this guy Dennis, he goes and tells his lawyers, and they take it to the judge, and the judge is like, nope, I'm not going to hear it. So finally it goes to the jury. The jury takes 1 hour to decide his fate. He's found guilty. And this is something interesting in the middle of page 139. The prosecutor looked up, blinking back tears as if heaven had answered his prayers. Tears of victory for sending an innocent black man to prison, while I was the one that should have wept, but I was beyond words and tears. So that's just a really kind of weird reaction from the DA. Like, that DA really thought that Ron was guilty, no matter what. And so he finally does have a few words for the judge, and in this case, he actually sings a song, which for some people they're like, he was just sentenced to like two lifetimes. Why is he doing this? This is weird. This is crazy. Again, not acting like they assume he should act. All right, so that is the last chapter for week 5. There are a couple of videos that I want you to watch. One is about this book, about this case. It's only part 2. Okay, we'll watch part 1 later on in the coming weeks. But part 2 is about why did this identification happen? Why was it clearly so wrong? Okay, and so it looks at the studies and asks specifically with this case, with this lineup, and what went wrong with Jennifer's identification. And they even talk to Mike, the detective Mike. He is in that. I don't think they identify him, but he is in there, and he admits, yeah, we got this wrong. The other video is about implicit and explicit bias. We all have bias. Implicit is when you are not aware of it. And a lot of times it's the culture in which we grew up. If you think of it being like fog that you're breathing in all the time, it's how you've always thought, your ideas, things like that. And so we are never aware of that. But then there's explicit bias. And that is bias that you're aware of. So if a boss tells, if a boss tells you, and you're a woman, and he says, well, I'm not giving you as much work as that other guy because you're a woman and I know you won't do as much work well. That's explicit because they know they have that bias. But implicit bias we have, especially with implicit racial bias we have. And so there's a video there as well to start showing you a little bit of that and what's going on. Okay? So if you guys have any questions about any of this, please let me know. I hope you're still finding it interesting to read to see what happens. We've got just a couple more chapters in part 2 of Ron's story. And then part 3 is we kind of switch back and forth between Ron and Jennifer's story. Once he's released from prison, how do we tell Jennifer about this? How does she react? How does Ron react? What happens with their lives? And that'll be very interesting to see. So I hope you guys are doing well. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.